Let's play a game. You are an all knowing deity. You have 4.5 billion years of Earth's history at your disposal. Events written in rock layers, ice cores, and DNA, fire raining from the sky, oceans turning to acid, an asteroid that ended entire lineages of life, all of it preserved, all of it verifiable by anyone with the right tools. You want to write a holy book. A book meant to demonstrate your power, a book meant to prove across all of time that you created the universe and see everything in it. What stories do you choose? If you are the author of the Quran, the answer is regional folklore, stories confined to roughly 1,500 kilometers from Mecca, stories that go back no further than about 2,000 years before Muhammad, stories that were already circulating in oral tradition across Arabia and the Levant long before the 7th century. That is the pattern I want to walk through. Not as a matter of faith, as a matter of evidence. Because if a text claims omniscience, its knowledge footprint should not align this precisely with the knowledge footprint of its time and place. Let's look at what the Quran chose, then let's look at what it didn't. The first story is Noah's flood. The Quran describes water covering the entire earth. Every living thing outside the ark drowned. Depending on whose Islamic chronology you follow, this happened somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 years ago. If this actually occurred, the physical record would be unambiguous. A global sediment layer dated to the same period across every continent, a simultaneous genetic bottleneck in every species on Earth, uniform flood deposits from Alaska to Antarctica. We have none of this. What we do have is the Epic of Gilgamesh, written around 1800 BCE, same plot, same arc, same birds sent out to find land. The names were changed, the geography was shifted, the story was not. Everything the Quran's flood narrative required was available through Mesopotamian mythology, accessible in 7th century Arabia through Jewish and Christian traders and storytellers. No supernatural source required. The second story is the people of Lot. The cities near the Dead Sea were destroyed by stones of baked clay, turned upside down, erased as divine punishment. If true, we would expect destruction layers at multiple sites dated to the same period, physical evidence of catastrophic aerial bombardment, preserved ruins of cities that supposedly stood long enough to become infamous. We have found Troy. We thought Troy was myth. We found it anyway. We have found dozens of Bronze Age sites showing various types of destruction. The divinely destroyed cities near the Dead Sea, gone without a trace. The sites that apologists point to, Bab et-Dra and Numeira, show normal abandonment patterns. No simultaneous destruction event. No baked clay stones in any geological context. The story was borrowed from Genesis 19. Genesis was available in 7th century Arabia. The third story is the Thamud, and this one is worth slowing down for. The Thamud were real. They appear in Assyrian records from the 8th century BCE, an actual Arabian tribe. The Quran says they carved homes into the mountains at El Hajr, now called Madain Saleh, and were destroyed by earthquake and thunderbolt when they killed a miraculous she-camel. Here is the problem. The structures at Madain Saleh were not carved by the Thamud. They were carved by the Nabateans between the 1st century BCE and the 1st century CE. The Quran is off by approximately 700 years on who built what. This is the equivalent of pointing at the Colosseum and saying Moses built it. No seismic destruction layer at the site, no evidence of mass death, no cultural discontinuity. The Thamud declined the way most ancient peoples decline, gradually, without divine intervention, over time. The fourth story is Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea, an entire Egyptian military force, chariots, Horses and soldiers drowned while pursuing Musa. Pharaoh's body preserved as a sign for future generations. If this happened, the physical record would include mass deposits of human and animal remains in the Red Sea, chariot wreckage, weapons, and critically, Egyptian records acknowledging a catastrophic military loss of this magnitude. Egyptian records documented military disasters. There is no record of losing an entire army to the Red Sea. There is no underwater archaeology supporting this event. Every proposed Exodus pharaoh died on land, not in water. The story came from the biblical Exodus tradition. The Exodus tradition was available in 7th century Arabia. Now sit with that pattern for a moment. Every story the Quran chose sits within roughly 1,500 kilometers of Mecca. Every story sits within roughly 2,000 years of Muhammad. Every story was already circulating in regional oral tradition. The knowledge footprint is exactly what you would expect from a well traveled human being in the 7th century. Not one of these stories has independent archaeological or geological confirmation. Their vagueness is not a feature of divine mystery, it is a feature of inherited folklore. Now let's look at what an omniscient author had access to and chose not to include. 66 million years ago, an asteroid roughly 10 to 15 kilometers wide slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of Hiroshima bombs. The sky darkened for months. Acid rain fell for decades. 3 out of every 4 species on Earth went extinct. The evidence is everywhere. The Chicxulub crater in Mexico is 180 kilometers in diameter. A global iridium layer sits in rock strata on every continent. Shocked quartz and tektites are found across hemispheres. A global soot layer from worldwide wildfires. Tsunami deposits found more than 1,000 kilometers inland from the impact site. And then, at one precise boundary in the fossil record, 75% of all species simply stop appearing. No human in the 7th century knew this happened. An omniscient voice could have said, "Before you, I created beings larger than anything you have seen, and I destroyed them with fire from the sky." He buried their remains in the layers of the earth as signs for those who would one day learn to read them. That claim would have sat dormant for over 1,000 years. Then geology would have confirmed it. Instead, the Quran mentions the Thamud. 252 million years ago, the Siberian traps began erupting, a volcanic province covering millions of square kilometers. The eruptions continued for approximately 2 million years, not 40 days, 2 million years. 96% of all marine species went extinct. 70% of all terrestrial vertebrates. Life took 10 million years to recover. It is the closest this planet has ever come to sterilization. The evidence is in carbon isotope records in rocks worldwide, ocean anoxia preserved in black shale deposits, the body count readable in the fossil record. No human in the 7th century knew any of this had happened. 74,000 years ago, the Toba caldera in Sumatra erupted. The caldera is 100 kilometers by 30 kilometers, visible from space. The ash layer is found across South Asia, in the Arabian Sea, in the South China Sea, in the Indian Ocean. 15 centimeters of ash deposited 2,500 kilometers from the eruption. A sulfur spike recorded in Greenland ice cores dated precisely to this event. A volcanic winter that lasted years. Genetic evidence suggesting the human population was severely reduced in its aftermath. If the Quran had mentioned this event, even vaguely, the claim would have sat unverifiable for 74,000 years. Then ice cores and genetic sequencing would have confirmed it. That is what a miracle would look like, a specific claim that waits for the world to catch up to it. I know the response that's coming. Maybe God chose simple stories that 7th century people could understand. Let's test that. Were 7th century Arabs too simple to grasp? Before you, I made beings larger than anything you can imagine and destroyed them with fire from the sky? Because they had no difficulty understanding stories about magical she camels and cities turned upside down. Were they incapable of comprehending your ancestors nearly died out? Because they maintained complex tribal genealogies across generations? Were they too limited to understand a mountain vomited fire for longer than you can count? Because they already believed in dramatic acts of divine destruction? The simple stories for simple people argument does not survive contact with the text itself. The Quran is already full of catastrophes. The audience clearly had no problem with catastrophes. They simply believed in the wrong ones, the ones from folklore, the ones without physical residue, the ones borrowed from neighboring traditions. An omniscient deity would have known which catastrophes were real and which were myth. It would have known about the ones written into rock, into ice, into the genome. A 7th century human drawing on available oral tradition would not. The Quran preserves exactly the stories available to its time. It omits exactly the stories that would only be discovered later. That is not the fingerprint of divine omniscience. It is the fingerprint of human authorship. The evidence, or rather the complete absence of it, does not lie.